Hi, I'm Elfie and this is my Learn to Sew resource channel where all are welcome. If you watched my last video, you saw me alter a dress to add more volume in the skirt. I'll post the link in the description below if you wish to watch that, but to do the alteration I ordered a second dress to insert the fabric into the skirt. This left me a full bodice unused. I hate waste of any kind, so I decided to see if I could make my client some accessories to complement her dress. I picked a little baguette bag which zipped up fully and was fully lined. If you wish to try to make this yourself, I will include the pattern in the description below for you to freely download and print for yourself. Let's get sewing. When I began, I knew this refashion would be a bit of a challenge due to the original garment properties. I had to figure a way to compensate for the stretch of the fabric, the number of seams I had to navigate, and the sequin embroidery was also on a separate layer to the stretch fabric. I would need to work with multiple layers at once. To check the suitability, I first made the handle, cutting it from the skirt of the dress and then cutting a second layer in interfacing. The interfacing should stop the stretch of the fabric. However, interfacing alone isn't enough to stop the fabric stretching out over time, especially on the handle of a bag. So I cut a second layer of fleece fabric that I had in my stash and placed this inside the handle. Normally on this type of project I would use an interfacing with some loft and wadding. However, I would not usually make a bag out of stretch fabric, so this was all a bit of an experiment. To construct the handle, once cut, I ironed it in half and then ironed under the edges by 1/4 of an inch. Here you can see me cutting the fleece. I only cut a single thickness for this, I did not fold it double. I then aligned this inside of my ironed handle fabric and secured it with clips. You can use pins if you wish. I then took this to my machine and I stitched at 1/8 inch from the edge, securing it all in place. I tested this once complete and it felt sturdy and had the strength I needed. Happy with my multiple layers, I decided to proceed with making the bag and began cutting the rest of my fabric. As I was trying to repurpose scraps of fabric to reduce waste, for some of the pattern pieces I couldn't cut it on the fold. I actually added a 1 cm seam line at the fold line which I could later stitch down. hardest layer to cut was the main fabric. I had to experiment for a while to figure out the placement of my pattern pieces on my fabric. Eventually, I decided on using the underarm seam as a centre line for my main body. I then cut the long bag base section as two separate pieces, adding the 1 cm seam allowance as I had done on my fleece. When working with a garment, you have limited fabric, so when cutting out your pieces, try to limit the amount of damage you do to the rest of the fabric, stopping you from cutting in sections you may later want to use. Once cut, I had to remove the bottom lining fabric away from the main fabric, but keep my pieces pinned together so that the tulle layer didn't come away from position on the stretch bottom layer. I then repeated the full process in a mirror image on the other side of the bodice. To begin, I hand basted around the very edge of my main fabric, attaching my tulle embroidered layer to my stretch fabric. You won't need to do this if you are using a regular stable cotton fabric. This is just because I am using an old garment as my fabric source. We now have all layers cut. The main fabric, the cotton lining, the fleece to provide some body, and then the iron-on interfacing to stabilise the fabric. My first step was to attach the middle seams where I had cut folded pieces with a 1 cm seam allowance, so that it looks like this. Whenever you are sewing during this process, remember to backstitch at the front and end of each seam to secure your stitches. Once in a single piece and your seams are pressed open, apply your interfacing to the wrong side of your main fabric. You need to do this for the base and the main sections. Next, you need to apply the fleece layer on top of your interface main fabric. This is an extra step for me due to my fabric choices, and you shouldn't need to do it if you have used interfacing with loft. As before, baste around the edges of each section. main body and the base and align at the centre line, right sides together. Then line up the rest of your notches and the top edge. The base section will extend slightly beyond your body. This is so that we can apply the handle to the tabs later in the process. The corners will be slightly awkward depending on your fabric choice, but keep adjusting so you get no folds or bunches and you will get a nice smooth finish. Take this to your machine and stitch around the edge, securing in place with a 1 cm seam allowance. Try to keep your pins in place till the very last moment, and you may need to lift your footer whilst you adjust the fabric on the corners to make sure there are no tucks or gathers or folds. Work all the way around slowly. Now we are going to repeat this for the other side, matching our notches, our centre line and our edges are just the same. You will have slightly less room to work, but it is the exact same process, so just trust that you know what you are doing and repeat the previous step. Make sure your top edges align. Once again, secure this with a 1 cm seam allowance and lift your foot if you get any gathers or folds at the corners and just work your way gradually around. Repeat this full process for your lining fabric. When you come to the second side of the lining, you're not going to sew all the way around the edge. You need to leave a gap of about 2 to 3 inches along the flat base of the bag. This is to allow us to turn our bag later. Just sew from here to here and here to here. Leave this gap in the centre. Snip at the seam allowance along the curved part of your bag. Snipping allows the fabric to turn neatly rather than folding on itself and making points of tensions and bulges. Snip close to your seam line but not on the stitches, as this can create holes. Do this for your main fabric and your lining fabric. As I was refashioning from a garment I already had, I decided to take the zipper from my bodice to use in my project. Ideally, you will need a regular zipper as they are stronger and it will give you a better finish. Keeping the main fabric inside out, pin the zipper along one edge. Do not pin onto the tab section, just the bag edge. You are going to use a regular zipper foot and to stitch about 1/4 inch from the seam allowance. I have marked where I wish my zipper to end with this pin. Using a zigzag stitch, I shorten my zipper to length and cut it off. Repeat for side 2, making sure your zipper attaches evenly on both sides of the bag or you will get a twist. Open your zip and then place your handle inside your bag. It needs to go between the end of the zipper and the tab. Pin it in place. You can stitch this if you wish, but I like to proceed with it just pinned. And then repeat for the other side. Notice how the zip doesn't go onto the tab extension. Now, insert your lining, right sides touching right sides. This part looks terrifying, but it really is quite simple. Simply work your way around the bag, matching each point along the top line. We're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam allowance around the top edge. Visibility will be quite bad here, but just work slowly and feed the fabric with your fingers, feeling that your seams are all correct underneath. You may need to lift your footer, keeping your needle down occasionally in order to pivot and twist the bag. Please note that I am still working with my regular zipper foot on here, so that I can sew closely up against the zipper that is sandwiched between the 2 layers. Snip the curve along the top edge and cut away the seam allowance at each tab. Now pull your bag through the hole in the lining, feeding it slowly through. Don't tug as you could rip it. Check that everything looks right and place it in the correct position, and just keep adjusting until it sits right. To finish up, we just have to close up the lining with a straight stitch along this gap. You may wish to iron along the edge to make sure everything is neat, but don't melt your zipper teeth. Do this with caution and care. And there we have it, a baguette bag refashioned from the bodice of a dress, complete with zip and lining. You can hack this pattern in a great number of ways. Please do comment below in how you would hack it. You could possibly change the length of the strap, print it at a larger or smaller scale to change the dimensions, or add zippers inside. I do recommend something like a denim or a heavy cotton, perhaps a PU leather, when making this bag, but this goes to show that you really can make it out of anything if you just add the extra steps. Get resourceful, see what you have at home that you can make work, and repurpose bringing it back into your wardrobe. If you like this video and would like to see more, please hit like and subscribe to my channel to hear notifications of new videos. I release sewing tutorials for all skill levels, along with garment sew-alongs to inspire. Your subscription really helps me continue to make content. Thank you for watching to the end, and I hope you're inspired to go and give this a go. Happy sewing!